Hello and welcome to this podcast. My name is Graham Elliott from Salescraft Training, and this is the first episode in a series of 8 which go through common issues that impact most people, I think, in their sales career at some stage or another. For some people, quite often. So I hope you find something that applies to you and that you can then apply yourself to improve your career. So in this very first one, I'm going to talk about why some sales careers stall. And in fact, I would argue at some stage, most sales careers go through this point. And I'm going to talk about how you can overcome it, how you can get around it. So what happens in your sales career? Well, basically, most sales careers don't fail. They simply just stall. They hit a plateau where suddenly you're not moving forward anymore. You've got very stagnant. And this tends not to happen in the first year. The first year, if you remember when you first got into sales, or maybe you're in your first year, there's a lot of new stuff. You're constantly going outside your comfort zone. You're trying new things. New challenges are coming up. And you're learning all the time. Where this tends to kick in is around the third year, typically, usually in years 3 to 6. And what happens is that you kind of hit a plateau, your income will plateau, your sales closing rate will plateau, your opportunities will slow down. And what typically happens, or a typical thing you'll experience, is that your motivation drops as well. Suddenly, it's kind of like you're like that hamster on one of those little wheels, and you're not really getting anywhere. So what makes this even more dangerous and more disturbing, I guess, is that most people don't even realize it's happening. So let's initially just take a dive into why this happens. So, and before I say that, I'm going to also talk about some things you can do. If you don't recognize the symptoms I'm talking about, I'm going to suggest something you can look at to tell you where you're at. So typically, psychologically, what happens is we go through that early phase and we start to get successful. And that early sales success creates complacency. We begin to step back. We lift our foot off the throttle and we start to coast a little bit. The other thing that will happen is that we start to get into situations where they become familiar. Basically, we're looking at repetition, and repetition replaces deliberate involvement. So in other words, as things start to become more and more familiar, we start to step back because we kind of know that we've been here before, apparently, and we know how this is going to work out. So we're no longer as focused as we were in the first or second year of our sales career. Confidence can become rigid. So in other words, we feel confident, but we feel safe. We feel relaxed. We fall back, and that rigidity stops us listening. It stops us looking for alternative solutions to situations that we're experiencing. And then activity replaces strategy. So again, like the hamster on the wheel, we're just doing things, but we're not stepping back at any point and looking at the longer term picture, which is where the strategic decisions come. And that's how we not only make sure that our funnel stays good, just as a sales business, but it also means that as career professionals, we are continuing our development and basically setting ourselves up to deal with more and more difficult scenarios. So again, I'll dive into this. So one thing you can do to identify this is just look at your pipeline from 3 years ago, if you've been in sales that long, and just observe. This is about observation. Are your deal sizes any bigger than they were 3 years ago? Are the stakeholders, are the people you're talking to any more senior? What about your sales cycles? Are they the same kind of sales cycles as you were dealing with 3 years ago, or are you being more strategic? And I guess the fundamental thing is if you're no longer slightly uncomfortable with what you're doing, in other words, there's the element of, can I pull this off? Maybe I've bitten off a little bit more than I can chew, but these little things that they put us under a little bit of pressure, but in doing that, they make us much more focused on what we're doing. So if you're feeling really comfortable and settled and everything's hit a sort of stagnant level, yeah, I would say what I'm talking about here does apply to you. So I'm going to talk about 5 situations where your career is likely to stall. What brings this about? So the first one is comfort in success. In other words, you hit your quota and then you just stop. And I've definitely observed this. And where it struck me most often, although not exclusively, is tends to be with older salespeople where I've come into a role that they run for a while, and perhaps they're winding down their career a little bit. And I've stepped in and I realised they're talking to the same people. They're not looking for new people. And of course, what happens when you do that, people move on. So in reality, it means that the group of connections and network you have among your clients starts to get smaller and smaller because you're not actively out there looking for the replacements, looking for new opportunities. So they basically hit their quota, they stop stretching, and that's kind of it. They kind of coast almost to they coast to the end of their career, but in doing so, they can destroy a business that perhaps they've spent a lot of time building up. So the thing to remember here is that many salespeople don't fall out of sales. They just succeed themselves into stagnation. In other words, they've got a certain level of success. They're comfortable with it. They do nothing to improve it. The second thing is, I'm going to refer to it as skill freeze. In other words, they're thinking, I know enough. It's that thought that you don't really need to learn anymore because you're getting results. Why should I learn new skills? What's the purpose in that? I can actually have quite a comfortable time now. I'm feeling really safe. If I have training, I put myself in a position where it might look like I don't know what I'm doing. All those kind of things kick in. So how do you know you've got a skill freeze going on? Well, you could be running the same discovery questions, the same discovery process. And remember, the discovery part of the sales process, that in other words, that's when we're qualifying leads, we're asking questions about the requirement, we're matching their problems to what we can deliver as a solution. If we're not constantly reviewing that and looking for subtle improvements or even big changes, because competitors might come in with solutions that are as good as ours, better, or at least nearly as good as ours, and we need to be really clear about what the differentiators are. How can we lock out competitors? So if you're still running with the same discovery process that you had 2 or 3 years ago, there's a good chance you're in that situation. What about objection responses? Are you using the same responses? I mean, if they work, but there's a whole process you can use that gets the client engaged in giving you the responses to objections that they raise themselves. And if you're not running that kind of a discovery process, it's all part of the discovery, then again, the chances are you've hit a plateau, and without conscious effort, you're not going to get above it. And what about your closing style? Is it exactly the same as before? Now, again, if it works, it works. But as I've said, things can change. So it's always good to be looking at alternatives, having other options you can use. If a closing technique you've been using for years suddenly stops working, what do you do? Because as I've said, the thing you have to remember is the market's continually evolving. If you're in a product situation, new products come along, or client requirements change subtly because of various outside factors. So you may have been incredibly relevant, and I've definitely been through this in my career, where I've had incredibly successful products, and then all of a sudden there's been a change in the technology that's being used in the industry, and the gear I'm selling that I could absolutely rely on to hit the number was suddenly uncompetitive. Things had moved on, and this was yesterday's solution. So it's really important to recognize that the market evolves, and the bottom line is that your competition is improving whether you are or not. So it's really important to keep that process going, stay on top of what's happening in your market. Now, another one that I've consistently seen here, and I actually remember it very clearly, is what I refer to as the identity trap. But is where a salesperson sees themselves as a particular type of salesperson. So it could be an account executive, or you might recognize that, or you might define accounts in a certain way as maybe small accounts versus major accounts. The important thing to do here is to step back and simply recognize your role here is to create revenue for the business that you work for, whether it's your own business or somebody else's. And in looking at it that way, you're taking a much more strategic approach. If you start to pigeonhole yourself as a particular type of salesperson, say an account executive, what exactly does that mean? Because what I've seen in my own experience is once people begin to pigeonhole themselves, they'll stop looking at other types of account. And that can be a major problem. This is where you can miss major opportunities. So again, it's really important that you think about the economics of the deals that you're making. Are they good deals in terms of what you're bringing into the business? What about the long-term strategy that you're using? Is there a long-term strategy? Are you looking at changes in the market? How protected are you? Do you need to broaden the kind of people that you're talking to? So the one thing we can be sure of in sales is that the only constant, and this is true in life, the only constant in life is change. And that's very much the case when we're in sales. Now, another thing to consider is visibility failure. And what I mean by this is that this is definitely relevant if you are looking for a career in sales where you want to progress. You might want to progress from a sort of junior sales type role into a more senior role, maybe take on more responsibility, maybe move into sales management so that you start to run your own team. So you've not only got responsibility for your own numbers, but for your team and your group as a whole. And maybe you want to go beyond that, sales director, go into a much more senior role. Now, the thing you really have to remember here, and again, this is something I've seen, is that it doesn't matter how hard you work. Managers and senior people in a business are not going to automatically see you working hard and look to promote you. That just doesn't happen in most companies, and certainly that's my experience. The way businesses will often look at it is if you're hitting your numbers and you're not a problem child, let's say, then they'll tend to leave you alone, because within any organization, you get people who deliver consistently, and equally you get the people who fail to. And those people are the ones who tend to get more of the attention, because from a management perspective, you're looking at, can I coach them or have them trained to a point where they can hit the numbers reliably? Or do I need to get rid of them and bring in somebody else because this part of the business is underperforming? And when that's going on, if you're someone who's regularly bringing in the numbers, you're not that important in terms of you're not a problem to be solved. And often that's how management works. So what do you need to think about? You need to think about communication. So if you're reporting in let's say a sales meeting, you're talking about deals that have gone very well. Don't just report the outcome. Talk about the size of deal, what it revealed to you, what were the key insights that allowed you to nail the deal, maybe push out a competitor. How do you work with that? What was the kind of thinking? This is what management people are looking for. What are the kind of problems you've demonstrated you can handle? What kind of complexity in accounts can you handle? Can you deal with multiple stakeholders, for example? So basically, it's really important that you're visible and that you demonstrate that you are somebody who comes up with solutions. So the worst people to work with, and this as a manager, are the salespeople who come along and they've only ever got problems. So the way to deal with problems, if you've got a problem, is to by all means go to your manager with a problem, but say, I've thought it through and I think we have these options. I believe these are solutions that could work. What do you think, or do you have an alternative? That gives them, that immediately puts you in a much stronger position. The fifth thing to think about is passive career management. Now, this is really important because I've seen this a lot too. You have to ask yourself, who's managing your career? Because the bottom line is no one cares about your career as much as you do. And if you're expecting your employer to be worried about your career development, unless you're really, really lucky in your employer, most employers don't care. It's very, very low on their list of priorities. They've got other things to do. So you really need to step up and take responsibility for your career. So what does that mean? It means that you need to close any skill gaps you have intentionally. You can do that as a review with your manager. That might be asking for feedback on where they feel that you have gaps. You might recognize gaps yourself. And you can ask if there's training available, but be proactive. Don't sit back and wait for them to do it for you. You can push yourself more, go after harder deals, see what you can learn. Maybe bring other people in to support you if that's what you need to do, but stretch yourself. And also learn from top performers, find mentors, sit with people, listen to them. If you can, go in on calls with them, look at how they close deals, look at what their discovery process is like, what are they like on the phone, all that kind of thing. So the really important thing is to look at what you can do today. Okay, so this is all very good. These are all things that sound nice, but what I want to give you are just some things you can do right now. So the first one is to ask yourself, it's basically have an audit. What skill would make the biggest income difference to you today? And just do one at a time. Don't do a whole list of things. Or if you come up with a list, do one at a time. So that's the very first thing. And then once you've recognized what that skill is, what can you do? What are the steps you can take today, this week, this month, to develop that skill? The next thing is to stretch yourself, volunteer for harder opportunities. Try and step up. You will learn if you can, and you've got support from your manager. That's great. But that is a great fast track way of learning and improving your skill set. Give the signals, make your growth visible. If you have, I used to always do monthly sales meetings. They were pretty standard. I don't know what you have, but again, as I've said, when you're doing those, just don't report results, but talk about not only how you get there, but that you're happy to share with other members of the team how you achieved it. And then repeat. It's a kind of rinse and repeat. Don't drift into autopilot. Be very proactive with what you're doing, and just keep that framework. Keep growing. So the thing to remember is that the highest earners in sales aren't always the most naturally gifted. They're the most intentionally developed. And I have to say, in my own experience, at least in my own case, I never regarded myself as a natural salesperson. It was something that I had to learn, which incidentally made me a very good sales manager, and it made me very good at teaching because I had to consciously learn each of the steps in order to overcome objections, to do discovery properly, all that kind of thing. But it meant that when I saw people messing up, I recognized, because I'd messed up, I could see the symptoms. So being successful in sales is not about having a natural skill set, and often that can undermine you, because if you're doing things naturally, you don't naturally know what you may find it difficult to describe what the steps are. So be honest, audit yourself, recognize the next steps, and then work on them. And one thing I always used to do, once I'd finished a call, I'd drive there, but it didn't really matter. I'd just find somewhere to sit down and just quietly review that meeting. It was not to beat myself up, but to objectively look at what could have gone better, what could I have handled differently, and just make notes and try and apply them next time. And that really is, I think, the secret of avoiding a plateau and keeping your sales career on the right trajectory. Think about yourself as an elite athlete. What do elite athletes do? They're constantly training. They're constantly looking to improve certain areas. They'll focus on those and then move on. They set themselves goals. And this, honestly, is the best way you can approach your sales career. So I hope you found that useful. Now, these podcasts go out every Monday. And next time, I'm going to talk about how you can build confidence, because I find that a lot of salespeople suffer from imposter syndrome, almost sitting there waiting for someone to discover that they really haven't got a clue what they're doing. So I'm going to talk about how you build your confidence in next week's episode. So I hope to see you there. I hope you found this useful. If you have, please like and subscribe. If you're a sales manager or salesperson, please share this podcast, and I'll do my best to help you in your sales career. So bye for now. If you found this podcast useful and hopefully it's got you thinking, please sign up to my mailing list. There's a link in the description where you can just sign up and I'll keep you informed of what's going on. There's also a link to a free 1-hour webinar. It's an on-demand webinar and I'll take you through 3 things you can do right now to improve your sales confidence, and that includes handling objections and closing the sale. So please check out the links and please join the mailing list, and I'll speak to you next time.